Well, hello everyone. I hope you're all doing well today. My name is Emily Sprenger. I'm an academic trainer for the Center for Teaching and Learning. And I'm happy to have Dr. Rickard Briggs here today and his webinar presentation of business structures. Which one is right for me? As you filter into the room, just a couple of housekeeping things. Do remember that this webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions, as Rick is doing his presentation, please feel free to post anything in the chat. You can also ask any questions in the Q&A. And if it's appropriate, of course, you may raise your hand and I will allow you to speak as well through that forum. So he's mentioned that he wants the webinar to be interactive, so please feel free to ask those questions and we'll try to address them as we move through the presentation. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to Rick.
I guess I'm on. It's my turn. Hey, I can't see anyone. So I just start applauding now and don't stop until the end, okay? That way I can just have that, love right from the beginning and we can feel that motivation all the way through. All right, so the questions that I get a lot are directly correlated to what type of business entity is best for me. So I've been addressing small business concerns and individuals for a great period of time, and I've offered an assortment of ideas and advice when it comes to business structure and entity. And what I've discovered over the course of time is that there's a lot of information on the entities. There's a lot of information on what the pros and cons are for each one. I'm taking a different tack here. And as we go through the presentation, I want you to be aware that, yes, there'll be an overview of the types of entities that are available, but this is more of a discussion as to what's a better fit for you. And then there are some other discussions and other considerations that you just generally don't get to talk about. So as we move through here, and you'll see a couple slides in a few seconds as far as a disclaimer is concerned, because the conversations that you need to be having are related to what is best for you, and those vary from individual to individual. So without pausing any further, I'll move through the presentation, and please interrupt, ask questions, and if you don't get the answers that you want today, follow up with me, contact me through the business incubator at NCU, send me an individual email, whatever works best for you. Heck, give me a call, shoot me a text. All right, let's see. So today's agenda, what we're going to cover is an introduction. The time, I'm very respectful of the time that you've invested into being here today, and I don't want to overextend my welcome. I can talk for hours, so when I get to 40 minutes, Emily, please tell me, hey, you know what, Rick, 40 minutes is up. We need to talk about questions from individuals. Let's see, purpose. So the main thing or the main focus of each one of the entities is risk or the exposure of. How much are you willing to shoulder? What's your liability? And how can it adversely affect you and how can it benefit you? Of course, we're going to talk about business structures, and that'll give you a foundation as to what's available. The pros and cons of each, just a cursory overview of the benefits, because quite frankly, each one could be its own webinar as far as tax benefits, liability, insurance, and such. Misconceptions, cost and liability between which of the entities is more effective, what the costs are, and how you can greatly benefit from understanding what you need to spend and what you don't have to spend. And then we'll hit through and then we'll address your specific questions. So to start with, I had to put a disclaimer in here. And the reason being is I'm not giving you advice. I'm going to tell you stories anecdotally, as well as information that's been passed along to me from other business owners. Now, that doesn't mean that what they've done is ethically or legally correct. And as such, I'm sharing those stories with you. We all make decisions. Business owners are at in a very gray area a lot of the times, and the decisions that they make. And do you use your clients' money at the beginning of the month to pay payroll and pay your clients back? Those are questions that legally, no. Ethically, no. Does it happen? It does. And you have to be fully aware, especially when you select your business entity, what your liability is going to be and the decisions that you make as an individual, how that could adversely affect you. So I'm going to tell you right from the get-go, do the right thing, don't break the law, and make the moral choice correctly. That being said, everyone does 60 and a 55. All right. So that's my disclaimer. Who am I? I'm an associate professor at NCU. I also do the business incubator. My primary responsibility at NCU is I'm the program lead for the PhD in business administration, and I also teach a number of the doctoral courses. I have, for all intents and purposes, left the business entities that I created behind. I sold in 2013 and then went into academia, which was a step back from the businesses that I had generated. I started off with local businesses, domestic businesses. I moved to international, and then I created global businesses, not by a choice. It was more of at the bequest of clients. So businesses grow based on clients' needs. A client asks you to do something, you do it. You figure out a way or a solution and identify an opportunity to make that happen. It just so happened my clients asked me to do things that I couldn't handle within a state, within the US, within 2-3 countries. I went global. So I've been doing I've been a serial entrepreneur pretty much since I was 12. But nonetheless, I am now teaching, and I have the pleasure and the joy of passing that information along. And those choices that I made in multiple businesses are reflected in some of the stories that I'll tell you today. The choices that I made are my own personal choices, and I share those with you without any regret whatsoever. And I've made decisions that, quite frankly, we exploded. But in order to do that, I had to make difficult choices, and you will have to do the same thing too. And that's why when you select your business entity, that's the foundation. That's where you start. And there are choices that you can make right from the get-go as to what the right thing is, what the right structure is for you, but also which is more applicable. All right, let's see. Oh, I put my contact information on here so you can access me at any time. So when we talk about creating a business, and a lot of the questions that I have, especially through the incubator and through students and faculty that have reached out to me, as well as friends and family, which business is right for me? So the first thing that you have to understand and is appreciate that a large percentage of businesses don't make it. They fail. That's okay. And you can rebound. That's not an issue. But understanding the percentages and the likelihood that your business is going to succeed also dictates what kind of entity you want to establish. Do you want to spend $2,000-3,000 setting up a partnership or an LLC when a sole proprietor is perfectly acceptable and will allow you to get your feet wet, allow you to see whether or not the business will take root, will grow? That's an opportunity for you to identify. From a business creation standpoint or from a business development standpoint, we would call that prototyping. So you can start your business as a sole proprietor, and there's no reason why you can't continue to do your business as a sole proprietor until you have a need or a desire to move into the next phase. My general argument, no matter what you do, no matter what business entity select, no matter what business you're doing, is always plan for the worst and hope for the best. As far as revenue is concerned, most entrepreneurs, most businesses don't strive to make revenue, they strive to fulfill a need. Fulfilling that need allows you to generate revenue. So if you focus in on your clients, if you focus in on the need, the revenue is a tangible benefit of your hard work. So when we talk about risk, when we talk about why we select a business entity, it's primarily, there's a number of reasons we select a business entity, but what I want to talk to you about today is risk. What are you willing to to bear? What can you shoulder? So what's at risk? Well, quite frankly, it could be everything. It could be your property, it could be your investments, it could be your assets, it could be your vehicle, and your bank accounts, and pretty much everything that you have can be taken from you if you mess up. So don't do that. And, and again, this is a conversation that we have to have at the beginning, because if you have nothing, what have you got to risk? And if you do have something, there are certain things that can't be taken, and there are certain things that can. And there are certain ways to protect and shield those assets if you want to go out and on a limb and basically take a bigger risk. So when we talk about organizational types and structures, generally, I'm sure you've heard these terms on a regular basis: a sole proprietorship, a partnership, or LLC, a limited liability company, C Corp, and an S Corp. We're going to be focusing primarily today on the two entities that most companies. Oh, I'm sorry, Emily, do you have a question?
Yes, I do in the Q&A.
I saw your face. See, good, it worked. Go ahead.
Okay, Dr. Stephanie McCallum wants to know about the C Corporation is her main point of interest. Can you describe this type of business? And I just wanted to make sure I see it. It's popped up here on your presentation. Is it going to be addressed later?
It is. In a holistic approach, a C Corp is basically the end result for, quite frankly, a larger business. So I would argue that if you don't have a large volume of revenue, a large client base, employees at this point in time, a C Corp is probably not the best course of action. A C Corp comes through a organic process of moving through a business development stage. So very few businesses are actually C Corps.
Okay, thank you so much. That's it for now.
Okay. All righty. Let's see. So C Corp, S Corp. Yep. Okay. Let's see. And so the factor, there's a number of items that, and these are, this presentation or this section of the presentation is what you would generally see in a classroom, what you would see at an SBA conference or let's see, a SCORE presentation, where they'll just basically take you through each one of the entities and explain the features and the benefits, because there's no liability there, is there? It's just, that's the way it is. Taxation, one of the benefits of pass-through income at a sole proprietor and an LLC is that basically it can be affixed to your personal tax returns. No fuss, no muss. That's great. Liability and risk. Obviously, the association with liability, whether it's personal property or whether or not it is through litigation, is a major consideration that you have to undertake. Management. As you move through, and we just had a question on C Corp, what will happen is as you grow through your business entities, the management structure changes quite a bit. Obviously, a sole proprietor has complete control. A corporation doesn't. A corporation generally has a board that's responsible for the decision-making process. Transferability, continuity, absolutely. There's one of the things that's not talked a lot about is exit strategy. And that's important to take into consideration when you're creating your entity. Why? Creating an LLC by today's standards can be done in 15, 20 minutes utilizing a couple websites, whether it's the IRS to get your EIN number and then the State Corporations Bureau to register your business. So it's easy to set up. It's relatively cost efficient, but you have to remember that, quite frankly, what happens is if you want to get out of an LLC, you have to submit the documents to the state. That basically means you're free and clear. Those include tax documents as well as any liens or any processes that have been initiated against you. Let's see. Expenses, obviously, there is a diversification of expenses and costs based on your business structure. A corporation basically is paying for all expenses. A sole proprietor, well, guess where the money's coming from? You got it right out of your own pocket. All right, sole proprietor. So I'm pretty sure that's pretty self-explanatory. You are the person, the only person who makes the decisions, everything flows through your own income. All you have to do, quite frankly, is attach a Schedule C for your business expenses to your 1040, and you're done. The owner controls everything. It is the lowest cost of form, zero. How's that? Appropriate for a small startup. You see, I disagree here. It's not just appropriate for a small startup. It's appropriate for a large number of businesses based on validating the integrity and growth potential of that business. What does that mean? That means that if you have an idea, if you plan to create an app or a business entity that you expect to explode, you can still start off as a sole proprietor. You can still get your feet wet. You can still take that item out, create a marketing strategy, create a business plan, create an opportunity for yourself, and then test it. And then whether or not there's liability, well, your only liability comes if it actually takes off. If it doesn't take off, you haven't lost anything, and there's no expense at your end. So that's something extremely important to take into consideration. I have a lot of people who come to me and they say, oh, I want to do an LLC. Oh, I want to be an S Corp. Okay, why? Well, because I've got X, Y, and Z, and I've been told that's what I'm supposed to do. Okay, again, you're going to get a lot of people telling you that's the most applicable avenue to go. There's an expense there. And again, circling back to the failure rates, if it doesn't take off in 6 months, what are you going to do? You're left with an open LLC that now you're filing tax returns at the end of the year saying non-existent business. So take that into consideration. Let's see. Next, a general partnership. Partnerships are, Emily, hi.
I was hoping I could pause you right there because there are several questions in the Q&A. Is that okay?
All right, let's rock.
Okay, cool. So David has asked, it's in the Q&A, he's asked, I own a private investigation company. I have insurance with an errors and emissions rider. Should I change from sole proprietor to LLC?
Wait, I'm sorry. Could you run that by me? That's a good question. That's a great question. What was?
Would it be okay if I allow him to talk? He's raised his hand. So hold on.
Yes, please, please, go ahead.
All right, David, you should be able to talk if you unmute yourself. David, are you able to unmute yourself? Oh.
Unmute.
Oh, there you are.
Okay.
Yes.
So I own a private investigations company, and I've got insurance of like $1 million with an errors and omissions rider. And I'm wondering if I should change myself from a sole proprietor to an LLC to protect myself further in case something were to go wrong.
Well, that's a great question, and the simple answer is yes. And let me give a little bit more clarification. Just based on what your initial line, private investigation firm, I would want to minimize my liability as much as possible. Yeah, your E&O insurance, that's great. I would also suggest that you have an umbrella insurance to cover that as well. There are a lot of caveats in E&O insurance that an umbrella policy can cover. As your business gets bigger and bigger, you want to have more and more insurance. Given the liability PI would have, I would argue that it would be beneficial right from the get-go to have your company change from an sole proprietor to an LLC. Again, from a cost perspective, it would run you a couple $100s to do it yourself online.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well,
thank you, David. And just a friendly reminder to mute yourself when you're done speaking. I got a few more questions in the Q&A. Horatio asked, is there a certain amount of revenue made for LLC when filing with personal taxes?
No, an LLC, as a matter the IRS is gracious in understanding that during the initial 5-year period of your establishment, they expect you and anticipate that you will lose money. So quite frankly, from an LLC perspective, and even from a sole proprietorship's perspective, the first 5 years you can operate at a loss without any questions asked. When I say any questions asked, again, do the right thing. but it's not uncommon that your income will substantially decrease based on the creation of a business entity. And that decrease is directly correlated to the investment and startup costs that you outlay for your business.
Great. And he says, thank you so much. And then there's one more question. And just so you know, Tabitha, yes, there will be a copy of this presentation that I post in the comments, and you'll have access to it as a student. But the other question is from Nicole. When starting a business, why does the owner of the company / business invest all of their funds into a business, but forget to put money aside for a rainy day? Why would you say that their mentality is that they're going to succeed right away, so they don't think of saving?
And that's a great question. And the answer to that is we're entrepreneurs. We always see the glass as half full. It's not going to fail. It's going to work. We're going to make $1 million. So there is a mindset that failure is not an option. The problem is, statistically, failure is generally the end result for a good number of businesses. Unfortunately, the liability that an individual incurs is directly correlated to their investment. And unfortunately, the majority of businesses, especially small businesses, start utilizing money that is borrowed from family and friends and put on credit cards. So when that business does not succeed, you're left holding the bag for a good number of fair debt. So avoiding that debt at all costs is extremely important. And that holds true with establishing the correct business entity. The difference between a sole proprietor and an LLC is the LLC is not liable to creditors for debts. So even if they sue you and lawsuits, even if they sue you, even if the collection agencies come after you from a business debt, it doesn't affect you personally, but it can affect you if you're a sole proprietor. But again, if you don't have anything, and then I'll talk a little bit about what's available as we get towards the end, the back end of what can happen to you if you don't pay your bills. But quite frankly, since you're putting the money up front, then the liability of lawsuits for product failure or from personal liability is minimal.
Okay, great. And I'm going to pause there because I know you have more to share, and we can get to a few more questions after that, okay?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I'll keep up. Let's see. So partnerships. So here's partnerships are very common. And there's a couple different avenues that you can take from partner. Me and Bill want to start a business together. We're going to, we're opening up a pizza shop. I'll make the dough, he'll make the pies, and good, we're a partnership. And we share all responsibility, the highs, the lows, the work hours, everything. Sounds like a pretty good deal, right? Except Bill doesn't show up to work half the time. Okay, then what? So what I'm getting at is that the perfect partnership is few and far between. That's why an agreement is extremely important. A handshake these days, no. When you create a partnership, you want to have a document in place that stipulates the requirements of each partner. You can have silent partners. You can have individuals that contribute, that are managing members, that's an LLC. But you can have a partnership agreement where there's 3 partners, 2 do all the work, and 1 is the investor. So it would stipulate in the partnership agreement that the investor is actually doing nothing except funding it, but then is entitled to X amount of dollars. The point there is that whenever you draft a partnership agreement, I don't care whether or not it's your best friend or your spouse, and believe me, especially if it's your spouse, don't get me started. Make sure it's in writing. Make sure you and it's not so much you're writing it so that you're CYA. It's more that you detail the responsibilities of each person. Then you can hold them to a court or to account if they fail to meet those responsibilities. That's important. And it's something that a lot of people don't think about at the beginning or at the onset of a partnership, but it's something that absolutely comes to the surface. Let's look at the divorce statistics, right? 53% of marriages end in divorce. Quite frankly, partnerships, just as bad. All right, let's see, next business entity. LLC, limited liability company. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on limited partnerships and limited liability partnerships. Again, the same situation. Actually, I think I just covered this when I explained that you can have a partnership agreement and liability would depend whether or not they're participating actively in the business or whether or not they're an investor. And then that would be a limited partnership. LLC. So this is probably the most common. It's sort of a hybrid model in between a sole proprietorship and a corporation. And it is the business entity that the majority of companies operate under. Even large corporations still operate as an LLC. And why? Because there's tremendous benefits, not only from a tax advantage, but there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to management and the creation of additional organizations or the subsections of the original LLC based on the business's growth. You can, without getting into too much of the benefits of the tax situation, it is extremely beneficial because you can still flow that straight through your own personal income. You don't have to, and if you, as a C Corp, the cost of having a professional accountant, which you would end up having to have in order to file, because quite frankly, C Corps are going to be much larger, it's an inordinate expense that one doesn't have to assume. So as long as you can stay in LLC, your costs or annual costs for filing is going to be decreased, but the tax benefits are the same. And as a C Corp, there is the possibility of being double taxed. So stay in LLC as long as you can. Corporation. It's a legal entity, and the difference between a corporation and the entities that we've discovered so far is its own physical being. That means that everything that it does, there's no liability at all to the members or to the stakeholders, shareholders of that corporation. It's the corporation's business. The corporation acts through its board of directors, and the board of directors are not held culpable for any of the actions that the corporation undertakes. So if the corporation is sued, if the corporation loses everything in a stock sell-off or an ISO, an IPO, the benefits are shared throughout the corporation. The members are paid. And this is where we get into that double tax. So the corporation is taxed on its profits, but the individuals are also taxed on their revenue or their dividends, as well as any salaries that they get. And that's where you get the double taxation, which you wouldn't have with an LLC. And as you can see at the bottom, most businesses do not need to incorporate. Statistically, a very small percentage of businesses by today's standards are corporations. It wasn't always that way. Back in the 40s, the majority of businesses were corporations. Let's see, C Corp, regular corporation. I get a lot of questions. What's the difference between C and S? It's just based on where it's written in the tax code. So from a C corporation, which is a regular corporation, it's the most common. Liability, companies tax, double taxation. It's complex. It really is. There's a lot of paperwork that has to be done as far as establishing the board of directors, as well as annual, quarterly, and the amount of filings that are mandated that a corporation has to submit, not only to a state, but on a federal level. An S corporation, actually, an LLC can claim S corporation status. There's tax advantages, and for a sole proprietor as well as an LLC, as filing as an S corporation. You can still do pass through revenue, which is actually quite good. And I would suggest, again, after you move to a point where your revenue justifies moving to an S corp, that's a logical next choice. Let's see. So how do I decide which structure is best for my business? All right. It's a good question. I'm glad you asked. Let's see. So let's see. What's the best way I want to attack this? The organization that you have is based on a number of variables that most people don't take into consideration, and that's utilizing foresight. As I mentioned earlier in one of the questions, that we tend to, we're optimistic. It's always going to work. if you don't have a business plan is by for all intents and purposes, a large document that establishes everything from the management structure, the employees, where you're going to get your funding, the finances, and everything. It was very prevalent 15, 20 years ago. And the primary purpose was to solicit funds. So you would need, the bank would say, we need a business plan. So people would go out and write these, 100-page business plans in order to get a loan. Most businesses these days are actually self-funded. So do you need to go to that extreme? No, you do not. Quite frankly, you can create, and there have been a good number of books, and it's been empirical research that dictates that a business development plan is an evolving document, that you can create an outline from inception, and that outline, then you can add to that outline and it grows. So it's a development plan, not a business plan. And I'd like to think of every business as in growth. And as such, if you're starting off fresh and you don't have an existing business, the assumption is, okay, let's start at the beginning. And the beginning is a sole proprietor. And it doesn't matter whether or not you forecast your business selling $10 million worth of widgets in a year. It doesn't, you can start off as a sole proprietor and you can switch that almost immediately in a couple hours to an LLC if necessary. So what dictates your growth is your business volume. If you don't have any volume, why do you need to be an LLC? Why do you need to be an S Corp? Why do you need a partnership? You can have a partnership without incorporating or notifying the state. You can have a document that's drafted up between the two of you to get the ball rolling once you start having clients. Now, this is where we get into the liability, and this is where we get into that risk factor. How much risk are you willing to take? And that's per person. It has nothing to do with a unilateral, everyone's exposed to the same risk. A 20-year-old living in a $200 a month apartment with an income of $8,000 really doesn't have a lot of exposure. And remember, exposure, and everyone talks about, oh, if I sell something and someone gets hurt, they're going to sue me for $1 million. Well, let me let you in on a little secret. Generally, people get sued when they have something to collect. If you have nothing and someone's suing you, what are they going to get? And most attorneys are expensive. So the first thing that someone does when they look at you or they look at your entity to find out whether or not they should go after you from a litigation standpoint is there a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? Do they have liability insurance? Do they have product liability insurance? Do they have an E&O insurance? Do they have an umbrella policy? Are they covered? Are they licensed? Are they registered? Do they have $1 million in the bank? All of that information is readily available. And if the answer to those is no, 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 well, why am I going to sue you? Why am I going to spend $10,000 on attorney fees to draft a complaint and take you to court when at the end of the day, I get a judgment that's worthless? And the judgment is also a problem. There are many firms that will say, absolutely, we can sue them. Absolutely, we'll get a judgment for you. They'll get you the judgment, hand you the judgment, and say, okay, good luck collecting it. Okay, so if you have nothing, then really people won't come after you. Again, this is where you have to shoulder the risk. If you are a 40-year-old married with $1 million home and 12 cars, a vacation home in the Caribbean, and $1 million in the bank, yeah, you don't want to be a sole proprietor out selling guns on the street. It's just not going to happen because of the liability. They will take everything you own. Again, two ends of the spectrum, and then you have to make your decisions accordingly. So, and I actually have an example at the end. Just based on those two scenarios, you have a sole proprietor and you have a C Corp. That's it. It's that simple when you factor in the risk or the liability that an individual has or the exposure that a person has when you select your business entity. Let's see. Let's see, yeah, how you run your business. I think I've actually pretty much covered that. Personally, as a sole proprietor, and I did this. So you make the decisions. You can also be a single member LLC, which is just fine too. And going back to the individual who asked the question, I think it was David, about the PI, yeah, single member LLC, but it limits your liability. Let's see. Tax liability management can do expense most common. Yeah, obviously, from all intents and purposes, the most common type of business entity is sole proprietorship, and as for obvious reasons. I mean, an individual who's creating web content or publishing, working at home, doesn't have to be an LLC. There's no liability, or there's very minimal liability, and they can certainly shoulder the risk for that. The business plan, let's see, yeah, oh, well, actually, this is pretty good. Business plan is the best way to determine organizational structure. As I said, and as I've pointed out thus far, what you're going to do has a lot to do with what kind of business you should structure. If you're selling lemonade out on your front lawn, it sounds pretty simple, right? But you've got product liability. Someone drinks your lemonade, they get sick, and guess what? You're sitting on your front lawn. I just told you, you have a house in back of you. Silly as it sounds, that's not the best place to have a sole proprietor, especially with food and drink, beverage, and guns. All right, which is right for me? As I was just explaining, what's your product? What are your liabilities? What are your short-term and long-term plans? Is this a side hustle? How old are you? Is this a lifestyle business? And just a quick differential. Lifestyle businesses differ from businesses that are created for growth. For example, and I work with a lot of people, and these are absolutely wonderful. I'm sure most of you probably know someone in this situation who, let's say Tony and Maria, they have a local pizza shop. That's a lifestyle business. They make enough money to live in a nice home, to put the kids through college, and to pay their bills. But they don't have a growth potential. They're not interested in opening a chain of pizza restaurants through Western PA or Southern California. They're happy and content with their business. That's a lifestyle or a family business. A side hustle, very different. Do you deliver papers during the week? Sure, that's a side hustle. Do you sell t-shirts on the weekend at the local stadium? That's a side hustle. Do you do some consulting work? Side hustle. Again, very different from the type of liability or the exposure or risk that you would assume in comparison to a brick and mortar store, where you have the potential for liability, slip and falls, everything under the rainbow. I mean, sell someone a defective product. That's very different. Growth company, different situation. Again, it is a transformational process or an evolving process from sole proprietor to C Corp. It should be rungs on a ladder. And if you take away anything from this presentation, think of it like that. Think of a foundational and then moving up through that as a ladder. And it's a growth process. And so I have some examples for you just to give you an idea of where we stand. So Joe wants to open an eBay store selling junk. Sounds pretty simple, right? What would it be? Sole proprietor. Why not? And the argument would be, now it depends on what kind of junk. There are variables that you would want to take into consideration, but generally under that scenario, the most individuals who run eBay stores are sole proprietors. It's that simple. Stevie has, this is where it gets a little bit more complex. Stevie has an apartment above their garage for rent. Sounds pretty simple, right? Not so much, because now we've moved into a complete different area of risk. Someone falls down the stairs on their way up to that apartment. Well, guess what? They're coming after you. And if your homeowner's insurance is only capped at, let's say, $300,000 or $500,000, and that person sustains injuries that arguably could be lifelong, well, they could come after you personally. So what can you do? Well, you can create an LLC and then put that apartment under the LLC. Then the LLC absorbs the liability. That's one route that you could take. You'd also set it up, especially if you're doing property management, a C Corp may be applicable based on the liability. And let me give you an example. So you have a home that you're renting out, or a property that you're renting out, and you have $1 million liability coverage on it, but that property burns down and people die. That liability coverage is going to be gone. The other item too is that then they can come after you personally. And I'll talk a little bit about this in the future, in a few minutes, because one of the things that a lot of people misunderstand about an LLC is that there is liability. And that liability is based on what is, from legal terms, is called piercing the corporate veil, which means that if you intermingle funds, if you've committed fraud in any way, if you have not done your due diligence in filing your reports according to the state regulations, then you have broken or pierced that corporate veil, and it shifts back to sole proprietor and exposes you to liability. And speaking from personal experience, the number of times I intermingled funds, I mean, even when I was global, was astronomical. Did I use my personal credit card here for a business trip? Did I use my business card to fill up the gas tank? As silly as that sounds, that's piercing the corporate veil. That's intermingling funds. So if you've got $100 million in the bank, believe me, there are going to be attorneys that will know how to mitigate and get the veil pierced, because we all make mistakes. Let's see. Sam wants to open a at-home bakery. That's a complex one because, quite frankly, again, you're dealing with edible goods. You have you use a bad ingredient, someone gets sick. Well, there goes your liability. There goes your house. You're personally liable. That would be a great foundational LLC right from day one. Elliot wants to publish her book, sole proprietor. Everett wants to open a gun shop. No brainer. Straight to C Corp, period. That's as simple as that. The liability of that product alone dictates an initial investment, an initial cost to absolve yourself of any liability. All right, let's see what else we got. What does this mean for me? Corporate structure offers the greatest amount of protection, but at what cost? Sole proprietorship, do not discount this because of the lack of liability. It's simple to open, it's simple to close, and it's actually the majority of businesses are sole proprietors. So it works. An LLC does offer some of the same protections as a corporation, including claims for creditors, lawsuits, judgments, but be careful if you break the corporate veil. Easy to open, exit strategy must be clean. So it takes 15 minutes to open, can take you 6 months to close. You can do it by yourself. You can get investors with an LLC, sole proprietor not so much. You're going to have a hard time getting investors with an LLC because you don't have the assets yet. You can have as many members as you want. It's flexible, and it gives your company a much more professional appearance. And it's the best value. All right. The cost for establishing an LLC is minimal. It's easy to do. All you need is an EIN number, a registration, and a bank account. And if there's enough interest in that, that could be the next webinar. You tell Emily, we want another Rick webinar. All right. Let's see. If it was easy, everyone would do it. And these are just a few of the quotes, because I started off on a negative, and unfortunately, that's the truth. The truth is businesses fail, and the truth is more often than not, they fail. But why do we do it? Because quite frankly, you keep pushing forward. We believe it can be done, and anything worth doing, there's a risk to. And if you're not willing to take that risk, then perhaps this is not the right direction for you. Okay, let's see. I know I've got more questions. I hope I didn't.
Yes, you do.
Oh no, I did pretty good on time. Awesome.
You did great on time, especially
awesome.
because we addressed a few questions throughout. You had me cracking up a little bit as you were saying some of those things. That was funny. Let me get to it because I want to try to make sure we can address everyone's questions. So I'm going to go straight down the list in the Q&A first. So Bithja asks, how much does it cost to pay for an LLC? And there's a follow-up to that. What is the best website for an LLC?
Oh, well, it's relatively simple. The EIN number, which is the number that's issued by the IRS to identify your business, is free. Oh, wait, is it free? Yeah, I believe, yes, it's free. And it's at the IRS website. Just type in EIN number and it'll take you through a process. Point, click, fill in the information, and you're done. To set up, now the cost of establishing an LLC varies from state to state. It's run, each state has their own costs and fees associated with establishing an LLC. They're not expensive, a couple $100. But what you want to do is you need articles of incorporation and you also need a business plan. Articles of incorporation are required in some states, in some, it's just a form that you submit. All of those items are downloadable. A quick Google search will give you templates out the wazoo for them. You can fill in the blank. What I will suggest, though, is that the basic set of articles of incorporation, which is usually about 6 or 7 items, it allocates how many shares, who's going to be responsible, who the members are, and such and such. They can be amended. And as your business grows, if you're starting out, if you're just setting up an LLC, yeah, just do the bare minimum. But the second you make changes, the second you start bringing on additional people, amend your articles of incorporation and send them to the state. The state will keep track, and that's a legal document. It allows you protection should anything happen in the future.
Wonderful. So making sure you keep those articles up to date. Arthur asks, how would you advise a person living in the US and is interested in establishing a sole proprietor or LLC in developing countries?
Oh, well, okay, so here's the thing is you can do whatever you want in other countries from the United States. You have to adhere to their laws. Mm-hmm. So if you want to sell product, in order for me to move my company abroad, I had to establish entities in each one of those countries. Let me reframe it and start from the beginning. So I'm in Pennsylvania and I want to sell pizza here in Pennsylvania or widgets here in Pennsylvania. I'm good to go. I just register with the state and I start selling my widgets. But if I want to move to Ohio and start selling my widgets, I have to register as a foreign entity in Ohio and then multiply that by all of the states in the country. So theoretically, in order to conduct business in every state, I have to be I'm registered or based in Pennsylvania, but I'm registered in every state as a foreign entity. And you would have to do the exact same thing if you moved to any other country. And you'd have to adhere to their laws and their specific requirements in order to conduct business. And in some cases, they require you to have funding and capital and members and directors within that specific country. And so, yeah, don't get on the internet and start selling stuff in Belize just on a whim.
Okay, great. And then Marquette asks, when should you trademark? Beginning or when it's more established?
All right. Okay, so getting a trademark is a rather an arduous process. You have to go through applying for a trademark, basically means hiring a trademark attorney. There's ways you can do it yourself, but believe me, it's an investment that is well worth it because it's a process. The problem is that once you've actually created a logo, once you've created a physical item, it's copyrighted by law automatically the second you start using it, unless you're infringing on someone else's. Trademarking is would be relevant when the company gets so large, you don't want anyone kind of copying it or trying to use your mark to sell their product. And someone is selling 2 or 3 pizzas or 100 pizzas is not going to, nobody's going to steal your trademark because it's already copyrighted the second you start using it. So I would only suggest utilizing trademarking when your business gets big enough and you're worried about someone infringing on your logo or on your idea.
Okay, great. Let me see. Arthur has a question. Can a consultancy firm be sole proprietorship or an LLC?
Absolutely. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I would argue that as a consultant, you'd probably want to stay as a sole proprietor as long as you can.
Okay, and then I have two questions from the same person, and then I'm gonna allow somebody to speak. So Leonie, and forgive me if I mispronounce that, has asked, do you transfer the deed of your home you rent to the LLC for rental?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So basically, you won't own the home anymore. The LLC will.
Okay, and then the follow-up question is, how do you close an LLC?
I'm sorry. What was that question?
The follow-up question is, how do you close an LLC?
So it varies again from state to state as to the requirements. You can do it online, but the general thing is if you want to close an LLC, you have to provide the state with a claim. You have to get a release from the IRS that you don't owe any money to the IRS, and you have to file an affidavit stating that there are no pending lawsuits and there are no claims against the company. That will satisfy the state's requirement that your company is leaving the scene clean and free, and you're not abandoning debts or have any liabilities. And in some cases, it can take a little while to get their release from the IRS. And quite frankly, if there are any pending items, then it's even more problematic. But on that note, let me add to this. This is an important item I know I didn't address. Legal fees. So attorneys are expensive, and I've had people come to me, especially after they've already set up their LLC, and they said, Rick, I want you to help me do my taxes. And I say, okay, well, great. And then they've got a $3,000 deduction on their initial filing for legal fees to set up the LLC. And if you weren't following earlier, you can do it online for a couple $100. And the paperwork is relatively straightforward. It's easy to ascertain. There's no reason to spend $3,000 on setting up an LLC. I'm sharing that. Go back to the beginning. Do the right thing. Make the ethical choice.
Yes.
But don't spend money you don't have to. Okay. But here's the thing is when you need an attorney, going back to that trademark question, you need an attorney to do your trademark. You need an attorney to defend you in court if you're sued. So save your money for a rainy day.
All right, great. So Jasmine has a question. I'm going to go ahead, and she has her hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and allow her to talk if she can unmute herself, hopefully.
I'm here. Gotcha.
Great.
Hey, thank you so much for even speaking to us today. My question is, I have an LLC registered in Georgia, and it is a women's clothing boutique. It's in the startup phase, and I'm running into the point where I tutor as a side hustle, and I also model it's in between a hobby and a side hustle right now. I'm starting to make income from it. How in the world do I am I supposed to put my LLC on my W-9s if I'm an independent contractor, or do I leave that part blank because of the industries that I'm in?
Okay, so I'm a little bit confused. You've got one business, you've got your LLC that you're doing for clothing.
Yes.
Okay, and who are you sending W-9s to?
I tutor for a company called Varsity Tutors, and they just hire tutors as independent contractors. And I also model on OnlyFans. So OnlyFans requires a W-9 to stay compliant, and it's not necessarily they hire you, but it's something like you're an independent contractor for them. So
why are you don't have to use the LLC to submit the W-9. You can use as a sole proprietor, you can just use your social security number.
Okay, gotcha. That was my only question.
Yeah, I would keep I would not use your EIN, your EIN number for your clothing line for your other entities.
Okay, because a lot of I've asked several tax experts, and nobody really was able to give me an answer, and I can see why now.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. And then I have another question up here. It says, how do you recognize a business idea that will work? It's a big question.
Well, I've got 2 words for you. Pet rock. You don't know. You don't know. I have seen some of the worst ideas in the world make $1 billion. I've seen some of the best ideas fall flat on their face. One of my favorite stories is the guy that came up with a super soaker gun. Lovely guy, wonderful story, and obviously we all know it. It's a tremendous success. But there's 1,000 other products. I mean, you see them all the time, and the stories about some of these products, and they just fall flat on their face. So again, what I suggest, and I always encourage this, keep trying, keep throwing it against the wall until you get something. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Be flexible. If you're looking to do something, see if you can get some interest in it. And one of the things that we talk about now in the incubator and in business development generally is, will people invest with you? It's wonderful to go around to your friends and family and say, hey, I've got this great pen. What do you think? You think I can sell it? And everyone's like, oh, yeah, you could make $1 million with that pen, Rick. I love it. And then you say, well, okay, great. Give me $10 to help me invest and get my company off the ground. Ooh, I didn't know you wanted money from me.
Right.
That's a different story. So when you get people who are willing to give you that $10, then you've got an idea. Test it, family and friends. See who's gonna cough up the cash.
Great, thank you. And then Belinda asks, if you have a sole proprietorship conducting one type of business and you want to expand to conduct a different form of the business, how do you structure the new business?
I love it. That's a brilliant question. Because quite frankly, you have 2 piles on your desk, one for one business, one for the other. I know it sounds silly, but that's it. As a sole proprietor, you can have as many sole proprietorships as you want. Unfortunately, you're liable. So whether it's 1 or 1,000, you have the same amount of liability. When I say, well, no, it depends on the product and service, but you get the idea. So as long as you're, from a tax standpoint, separate them. And the reason being is you're going to file a Schedule C for each one of them anyway. So from a tax perspective, it's a document, and each one of your entities has its own Schedule C. Now, the beauty is that you can transfer funds. You can pay one company and then bill the other company. And yeah, that gets into a more complex strategy, because I can set up one sole proprietor as my payroll company, and then I can have a consulting company. But I actually send money to the payroll company in order to handle the management and pay the funds of the people who work for my consulting company. Me.
Okay, I know there's just a couple of minutes left here, and I do have several questions, so I am going to post Rick's email in the chat again, just in case we can't get to all of them. But Edmund asked, what's the impact of leaving an LLC inactive?
Okay, so that I like that, and I've done it, because an LLC is not mandated for a specific product. So if you leave the LLC inactive, you can always start it up again with something else. And that's why when I name companies, I use ambiguous. I'm not going to call it Rick's Pizza Shop, because that narrows the scope of the product that I'm selling. I could call it Rick's. Okay, so Rick's, I can do anything with Rick's. I could sell Rick's lamps if I want, or Rick's Pizza. You see, by creating an LLC name, I know you can also change the name too. So if you're sitting there going, damn it, I named my company Jim's Pizza. No, you can amend it and change it to Jim's, just for an example. But yes, leave it inactive, and you can just let it sit, and you can file on your tax return. It's just an active tax form every year. No harm, no foul.
Okay, let me see. One more I'm going to try to get in. Victoria asks, if I publish some books Is it better to stay as sole proprietorship than LLC? Or I have to change to be LLC because I produce some books and more money I invest in there. Which one is better, LLC or SP for tax purposes and low cost of business?
That's a difficult question, and because it could go either way. I would really need more information on where your revenue is coming from and what your exposure is. As an LLC, there are some advantages from a liability perspective, but I would suggest your advantage as an LLC is more from a professional perspective than it is from any other shape. As an LLC, you have you've separated it, you've established it as a professional organization, and if you've done one or two books, well, then it lends more credibility to the organization. And that's it, credibility. From a sole proprietor standpoint, if the liability is minimal, you'd be fine as a sole proprietor. But an LLC might elevate the status of your company. And from a tax perspective, I can't really see any benefits.
Okay. So one thing I can share is I did have a couple people ask in the chat and the Q&A if we can have a few more webinars on starting your own business. So I'll bring that back to the Center for Teaching and Learning team, and I'll talk to Rick about that later.
Please.
Hey, I heard the love during the whole presentation.
Yes, I know. It was great, though. It was great. And I want to thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We really do appreciate you, and thank everyone else for joining. I will post this in the comments later today, and please feel free to email Rick. I did post it in the chat, or you can always email me if you need a copy of this at espranger@ncu.edu, and we thank you all for your time.
Hey, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.